Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Monday, August 28th. Derek Van Riper here with Eno Saris on this episode. We're going to take a look at some players who are surprisingly meaningful at the end of this season. Maybe it was guys that were drafted that have become critically important to our rosters, but in a few cases, it's players that were nowhere near our roster back when the season started. And here they are holding down important roles as the final month of the season approaches. And this was really inspired, by a comment, I think, that was on your chat about Cole Ragans. Because Cole Ragans looks like he is going to be a late season difference maker. I believe it was Steve G who made a request that we spend some time assessing Ragans and what he brings to the table and trying to project out what the final 5 or 6 starts of this season might look like from him. And just from a how did he get to Kansas City perspective, I'm still surprised the Rangers flipped him for 3 months of Aroldis Chapman, if only because Ragans is a big arm from the left side that could do at least the basic things that Chapman does out of the bullpen. But as we're seeing with him as a starter in Kansas City, there's probably a lot more that Cole Ragans can do.
Yeah, it's really kind of amazing. I can't think really of a transformation this ridiculous in one season. I mean, when was the last time? I mean, we talk about velo bumps and stuff. When was the last time, 4 miles an hour? That's never happened. I can't. That's ridiculous, right? Mitch Keller, we were talking about him just this beginning of this season getting more velo, and wasn't it 1?
I think his was incremental over a couple of off seasons. If he's increased, I don't think it was 4 altogether, which is just absurd. But yes, this is a big bump for Ragans, but it's not just the velo, right? He's got a good slider, and I think that's something that's changed quite a bit from the pitch mix that he was throwing during his time in Texas. I was going back and watching old videos. I was just on Savant clicking strikeout videos, and there were a bunch of strikeouts that were from just a mop-up appearance against Atlanta. They were down 8, down 9, down 10, and there he was striking out the clutch key hitters in the Atlanta lineup, and it's this is actually kind of interesting. There were little flashes of this on a very granular level if you looked real closely. But, I mean, come on. Part of it's that there's little faith in the Royals being able to properly identify and or then develop pitching to its highest level. So to see this happening in Kansas City is also surprising for me, given our frustrations over the years with Daniel Lynch and Brady Singer and Brad Keller and a bunch of guys that have been kind of up and down, but mostly down, trying to break through for the Royals. So that's the other part of this that I just didn't see coming at all. When I see these surprising pitchers, usually it comes from a more expected place.
Yeah, well, don't pat the Royals too hard on the back. I think that this is a combination of Cole himself and Tread is the pitching lab that Cole went to in the offseason. Worked with Tyler Zombro, who's a pretty cool cat. You can follow him on Twitter. I've talked to him a little bit. And, I give Cole credit not only because it's the pitcher that has to do the work, but he came up with the idea for the slider that you mentioned, because he said he had 2 starts in the minors this year where he was just getting blasted by left-handed hitters. And he's like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm supposed to get lefties out, but his 2 other pitches, the changeup and the curve, they can have reverse platoon splits. And so he was getting righties out, but he was having trouble getting lefties out. And so he talked a little bit to Tyler and came up with this curveball that he throws, this new slider that he throws, and he throws it 87, and it's it's a gyro slider, so it's a harder gyro slider, but he doesn't need a lot of movement because his curveball is big. His changeup gets a lot of movement, and he has a cutter as well at 91, so he just needed something with a little bit of depth to get lefties out. I think the slider and the cutter are ones that he kind of he throws the slider more against lefties and the cutter more against righties, and otherwise force him change curve. I mean, this is really nice. It's 5 pitches. All of them have pretty interesting movement patterns. His four seam, we talked about the fact that he does not get great induced vertical break on that four seam, but he was like, I think he hit 100 with like one of his final fastballs in his last start. So he was like, yeah, let me just throw it hard and place it well. And sometimes I get 17s and sometimes I'll get 14s. And that's not going to be, my best foot forward either way. I'm not going to be a guy who's all about vertical movement. In place of that, he has good stuff, good velo, good stuff on the rest of his pitches and decent command. So I'm pretty excited. There were some would you rathers that came through on Cole Ragans, that I wasn't quite ready to. I don't know how far to push him. Let me see. I've got one in my mentions today. Could you have any would you rathers for Cole Ragans? Would you rather?
For the rest of this season, or we've been thinking about 2024 too?
The rest of this season, I think.
Tarek Skubal versus Cole Ragans.
Yeah, that's good.
It might be Skubal just because we've seen it for a little longer. And I think
that's true.
I think the thing about Ragans that you mentioned before we started recording that's really important is he's had 2 elbow surgeries, right? It was Tommy John surgery and then had to have another Tommy John working his way back. So that's the medical red flag that's going to be there that will probably keep the value from skyrocketing too high.
Especially like sort of dynasty. Yeah, dynasty. That's why the Royals were able to get him for a rental reliever.
Right. Because if you think about, Drew Rasmussen had 2. His were more spread out. That's really unusual to hear of the setback.
Yeah, I wonder if it was a revision or something, like it's on Wiki, it wasn't labeled a revision. But, with the fact that he never fully came back, that's one of the reasons I do like, buying on a Tommy John pitcher. I want him to even have pitched 2-3 games in the major leagues. First of all, I get to see some of the stuff. And then second of all, he made it all the way back, like Ragans didn't make it all the way back. Rasmussen had something similar-ish. So, I would say that's an interesting comp. Especially with the velo bump like this, you have to feel like, ooh, you know what I mean? Like a little bit nervous. But for the rest of this season, number 1 with a bullet, like something top 40-ish.
Yeah, so that'd be, if you looked at some other guys that go in that range, Ragans versus, we talk about Mitch Keller all the time. Is Ragans versus Mitch Keller a fair toss-up?
Keller's been riding ship a little bit after some struggles.
Yep, and I think his rest of season projections and Ragans' rest of season projections by ratios are pretty close by pretty much all the public-facing projections I'm looking at. Yeah, I think that's a fair would you rather.
Yeah, it's actually kind of tough. I think I'd take Keller. Would Ragans' competition actually be easier
for just the rest of season schedule?
Yeah.
The Fangraphs rest of season strength of schedule has Royals 500 for strength of schedule, Pirates 494, so pretty negligible.
Both have nice home parks. Both have the sliders are really a good pitch for Cole. The fastball, the 4-seam fastball is good for him. I'd say Stuff Plus doesn't like Ragans quite as much as Keller. But Keller's also underperformed as Stuff Plus in the past. So they're right at each other. I don't know. Pick one, pick the other. I don't know.
Okay, but we found the approximate value. So top 40 starting pitcher is not out of bounds for someone who's popped up mid-season. It explains why when you have him, you feel like he's a set it and forget it pitcher right now. And that's just amazing for someone that was an afterthought until 6 weeks ago. That trade was an earlier trade. I guess that was a late June trade. So yeah, really good story here so far for Cole Ragans. I think Aaron Civale is one of those guys, when I look at my lineup right now, I'd lean pretty heavily towards keeping him in most matchups, but I was curious if we've seen any noticeable changes in location strategy or pitch mix with his time in Tampa Bay so far?
Yeah, it's tempting to point out that he just had the first 2 games in a row with 10+% slider usage this season with Tampa. So, maybe they're bringing that slider back. I will point out that he's had plenty of times when he was featuring the slider more. 2021 early, he was throwing it a lot. He's thrown that slider a lot in the past. And the only thing that I would also say is that, like, sometimes the differentiation on that slider and that curveball is not huge. He throws the slider 80, 81, 82, and he throws the curveball 78, 79, 80. In terms of vertical movement, that's where the biggest difference lies, maybe about 8 inches difference there. But horizontally, they're about the same pitch. So, I wonder if it's hard for him to command or if it has had injury concerns for him. But for whatever reason, he has featured this slider more in the past. He has sort of gone away from it earlier this season. Maybe it's coming back. I think sometimes we overrate how much new teams do. I was trying to look at Lance Lynn, right, for the Dodgers. And I was going on my show with Chris Townsend on the A's cast. And he wanted to give the Dodgers a lot of credit for Lance Lynn. And I was like, sometimes I think you just get a good pitcher and you have some small tweaks and, especially if you get like a bounce back pitcher like Lynn, like some of it's just the luck turning the other way. And then you get a lot of credit for it because they're not doing anything. In fact, he's using the cutter a little bit less, using the four seam and the curve a little bit more. It's not, if you're looking at Lance Lynn before and after the trade, it's not actually that huge of a difference. And so I don't know. I think there might be some real small things about where to put certain pitches and how often. One thing I saw is, for example, he's throwing more low four seamers, which is a weird thing to say is a good thing. But I think what it is sets up the curveball. So he used to be very predictable with the four seam against lefties. It's like always high, always high. If you're a lefty, I guess it's easier to prepare for that. If he also throws the low four seam, then you can't say, look for the fastball high. There's going to be times when, and then you start swinging over the curveball, right? You swing more at the curveball because you see the low four seam. So, I mean, that's a tiny little thing. It's really not, it's like, a few pitches here and there, and that's it. So, what especially with Aaron Civale, it's similar. It's like in terms of raw pitches, he's thrown like 3 or 4 more sliders a game than you'd expect with Tampa Bay.
Yeah, that shouldn't completely change everything about a pitcher. There's still questions about the K rate. I think it's just that they've had so much success this year with Zach Eflin, where they made, I think, a lot more changes. I think you can tell yourself a story that they're able to get a lot more out of Civale or get the good version more consistently than we've seen in the past. But Cleveland's a good organization with pitching too, and they couldn't do it. So I think there's still some reason to be skeptical as well.
Look at, it's an extreme example, but look at the Noah Syndergaard's fate over the last few years. It's 2 smart
organizations couldn't fix him.
Yeah, I feel like every team was like, I'll try. So I have noticed that, and this happened before Civale came to Tampa, was that the vertical movement on his four seam, he used to get 2 inches less than he's getting now. This started happening with Cleveland, so it's not all for Tampa, but the vertical movement on his four seam is the best it's ever been, Aaron Civale. So that's another thing that you'll see with Tampa. He's thrown the four seam more. So a surprising thing to tell Aaron Civale to do. He's supposedly the bad fastball guy, but a few more four seamers, a few more sliders, and a few more Ks. But I don't know. Some of it was already happening before he got there.
Here's one for you. I didn't put this name on the rundown, but it was a question that a name that came our way before we started recording at Rates and Barrels on Twitter, Cristopher Sánchez has become important for a lot of people, right? 3.33 ERA, 101 WHIP, 64 Ks, and 70 third innings, 13 starts this year. The only category from a roto perspective where he's been light is the wins department. Just 2 wins so far. Not really his fault. He's on a good team, pitches deep enough into games now where I think that's very much in play. How sustainable is this? Because in a lot of ways, it's as much of a surprising pop-up as the first time that Ranger Suarez was effective in the Phillies rotation, where I think my longer-term view of that ballpark has always been hitter-friendly, be careful with back-end starters, and Sánchez doesn't have eye-popping velocity, but he's got 3 pitches, and he seems to have a pretty good location strategy that works and doing a good job of not beating himself with walks, too.
Yeah, I wonder if Ranger Suarez is a decent place to take this. Stuff Plus hates his sinker. It has really good raw movement, though. So I'm a little surprised that it hates it. And then the changeup looks exactly like his sinker, but it's 11 miles an hour slower. If I didn't look at Stuff Plus, I would say this is a real east to west guy with some good sink, funky release. I like the slider, 83, basically an 83 mile an hour gyro slider with a little bit of a cuttery look to it. And in terms of outcomes and what people are doing, they are hitting the sinker well. They have 11 homers on it this year and a 494 slugging. But the changeup, which has a really poor Stuff Plus, they're not hitting. And so I'm willing to give him the changeup and the slider and say he's a mediocre fastball, good change, good slider guy. And that's not too far from where I have Ranger Suarez. Not the greatest fastball, but some good secondaries, good command. These are the types of pitchers I don't mind, taking advantage of in the short run. I don't know, for example, even with Ragans' injury history, I think I would prefer Ragans season to season and in keeper situations.
Right. It's just that the ceiling is higher because of the stuff, the velo, the quality of the pitches, the number of pitches, all of those things favor someone like Ragans. But I think someone like Sánchez can be a little bit overlooked, and maybe in terms of ratios and expectations, is it a different side of throwing from the right side and everything? Seth Lugo, I mean, a forgotten man that lands in San Diego this year. It's a deeper arsenal than Sánchez. Throws 5 pitches, or he's thrown 5 different pitches this year. Throws his curveball more than anything else. It's different kind of approach, but I think the medium ceiling pitchers that continue to do well are this sort of soft spot in our game. They're inexpensive when you pick them up in fab, so they're usually pretty easy to get. I think there's a lot of skepticism about this group of players in general in keeper and dynasty leagues, and if you can find one that's a tick better than the pack, if we sort of wrongly lump these guys together, that creates a pretty big opportunity, because it's hard to get pitching in like high-end pitching, especially in long-term leagues, but you need kind of mid-level pitching too. I think the difference here, Lugo's had a lot of injuries. He's 33. Sánchez being much younger, you could see more keeper and dynasty appeal with him by comparison.
But still, I do think if you got like Zach Gallen in a keeper dynasty league, like it's pretty easy to value him. You're like, okay, this is a top end guy, good command, good secondaries. I got that. If you have Cristopher Sánchez and Ragans, it's a lot harder to value them because you may not get great offers for them. You may get people trying to just poach them and, be like, oh, you just got that guy off the wire. Like he's got no value. And I'm tempted to say that they probably have less value than you think. You're super excited you got Cole Ragans. He's doing great, but it's the kind of pop-up pitcher that you might be able to find again next year in your league. And I don't know. An example of that is in my Devil's Rejects. This is a 20-team league that we traded away Justin Verlander this year and it took forever. And even he didn't get much value back. We had to take George Springer, which is a good, I think in the end was a good trade for us. We're now in third, but that isn't, we were thinking, we were trying to get Zach Neto for him earlier.
Mm-hmm.
We were trying to get younger and try to get a middle infielder, but we took the veteran instead. And my roster is Zach Gallen at the top. That was easy. We kept Charlie Morton. That was easy, even though he had no trade value, but Charlie Morton was like, here's an old guy. We're going to keep him. This is the rest of my rotation. Cutter Crawford for this week. Cutter Crawford, Dean Kramer, Cole Ragans, and Zach Thompson, and Michael Lorenzen. We've had some injuries. We lost Tyler Mahle. Hyunjin Ryu is against Colorado, so he's on the bench. We had Tyler Wells. So there's been other guys, but all of those guys you could have picked up this year. In fact, I think we did. We picked up Kramer. We picked up Crawford. We picked up Lorenzen. We picked up Ragans. We picked up all those guys this year. And this is the third place in a 20-teamer. So, yes, you need those guys, but also they're there for you.
Well, I think that's, for me, it's they have more value as holds than they do as players to trade. They give you flexibility to move someone else. Because you did well on the wire, trading Verlander has not hurt you that much or at all. You've been fine.
That was the thinking. That's why I'm just willing to generally trade pitching for hitting is, I just feel like there's more of it on the wire.
So what do you think about Lugo? Is this another kind of Ross Stripling sort of thing? When it's good, you're really happy. When it goes bad, it can go bad pretty quickly. The health complicates things. Again, it's a curveball first arsenal for Lugo right now. Look at the pitch mix compared to previous years. It's really the same stuff that he's got in the arsenal. It's curveball, four-seamer, sinker, slider, occasional changeup. I guess he throws fewer changeups now than he did like 5 years ago, but how is he doing this? And what do you think the future holds for him as he's now past his previous MLB high in innings thrown this year?
I am developing a theory about elite curveballs and aging. My exhibits are Charlie Morton, Joe Musgrove, Adam Wainwright, Rich Hill, even throw in a little Merrill Kelly. And my theory is just that a plus or elite level curveball is somehow more beneficial to aging than even an elite level fastball. I think a lot of the elite level fastballs have 99, have big MPHs attached to it, which is a fair amount of injury risk just by throwing that hard, And it's a kind of this funny thing where I think, maybe conventional wisdom was wrong about this one about, don't throw too many curveballs. You'll hurt your arm. Like in this case, the curveball, is usually around 80, 81. Maybe it's just less stressful. Maybe there's something about curveballs. People don't swing at curveballs, right? For generally. And so maybe if you have a plus curveball by stuff that you can also land in the zone, maybe that's just a really good pitch. Because you think about it, if they're taking it, they're not swinging at it, then you land it in the zone. If they are swinging at it, then you land it outside the zone. It's a pretty good pitch. And in terms of platoon splits, often is very close to neutral or reverse. So you take a guy with a plus curveball, you give him a little cutter, you give him, add to it around a little bit. And then you've seen with Rich Hill and Adam Wainwright, the very extreme cases of guys throwing 80 poo and still getting by with just a big old curveball. So take this as a little pro Lugo screed here, because I think he does have a curveball on the level with those guys. Just by stuff plus, Lugo sits there right with Merrill Kelly in the top 25, and not too far from the corpse of Adam Wainwright.
Well, and I think with Lugo, it's still, from a velo perspective, it's fine. 93.5, you can live with 93.5. It's not awful. It's not great, but it's not. it's not in the Wainwright Rich Hill territory, right? So he still has a little bit of cushion with that. Throwing other stuff around that for a bit longer maybe helps another season or two along in a rotation. He's got a player option this offseason. I assume he'll decline it and go into free agency and shoot for like probably a 2-year deal again. I don't know if a team would go much more than 2 years for Lugo, but back end starting pitching, it's nice to have. And I think he could actually pull this trick again, because I don't think the question was ever about Lugo's talent. It was just kind of staying on the field. He's got a career 3.52 ERA and a 1.18 WHIP. He's over a strikeout per inning. It's just been lack of availability because of all the time lost over the years. Here's another.
I think he could almost get the Zach Eflin deal, 3 for $40.
Wow,
maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
I think he could get that. I mean, there's a question. I guess the question that's different from Eflin, but it's actually the same as Eflin, which is just how many innings you're going to get, right? And Eflin had that same question hanging over him.
Yeah,
they're similar in that they
9 in April, so there's about a 4-year age difference, I think.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right. I had started with sort of 3 and 30.
Yeah, Lugo will be 34 in November.
Yeah, but the aging with starting pitchers in general, I think, is a little bit more tied to stuff like your stuff plus number more than what your actual age is. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If your stuff has receded to the fact that it's below average, and it doesn't matter if you're 27. You know what I mean? Like, isn't Noah Syndergaard not even? Super
that's the fair point. And Syndergaard was DFA'd over the weekend. If you hear us keep mentioning him, that's the reason why. Like this, who's next? Who's the next team that's going to try and see if they can fix Noah Syndergaard on the fly? It just seems like it's going to take another offseason in a lab, if it's going to happen at all for him. But yeah, I mean, I think 2 years for Lugo is what I'm expecting. A third year, maybe it's in play for all the reasons that you're mentioning.
I think that Eflin is also a decent comp for how to think about his value year to year. He's in the established pitchers. I think he's a little bit above, if you're talking about keeper and dynasty, I think he's a little bit above some of the guys we've been mentioning.
Yeah, Eflin's tough to value from a long-term perspective, because I think for a while he was a lot more like a Cristopher Sánchez or a Ranger Suarez or those guys, Cutter Crawford, like for years.
Bit like available any year, just pitch him in the good years and don't pitch him in the bad years kind of a deal.
Right. So then he has this career best year in his first year with the Rays, and the K rate is up. It's a career high other than 2020, 25% K rate this year. Nice low walk rate, like he's done in his best seasons before. He's just consolidated all of the skills together.
Changing his pitch mix. Changed his fastball mix, changes his breaking ball mix. Like,
can you spend 5 years in that vast middle, the glob, as our friend Paul Sporer has called it? Can you live in the glob for 5 years and emerge from the glob as a trusted top 30, top 40 type starter? Because that's the break before the glob, right? It's that kind of pick 100 to 125 range, and then it's just like, now the pitchers are all pretty much the same. That's the way most draft boards tend to go.
Ragans with good health, I think, is the one that could just like immediately free himself of the glob. I think
he hasn't even been there that long.
The health is a fail, huh?
He hasn't even been in there that long. He's just going to run right through it. He's just going to say,
right,
this, I don't want to be in the glob.
I mean, the health is a fairly big asterisk. Lugo. Yes, Lugo's above it. Eflin, maybe not.
I love it. He still hasn't convinced you. That's the best part.
Right there. It's right there.
I think the market in general will be skeptical, because there's been so much underperformance relative to expectations prior to this season.
And
I want to ask you,
just good. Not many innings either.
Yeah. Well, tons of innings risk. I think that's the other part of it. I think innings risk when you're getting an elite strikeout rate is a lot easier to tolerate, because you can convince yourself, it's only going to be 140 innings, but it's going to be 175 or 180 Ks, and that's going to be awesome. So that's sort of
Lugo's closer to that. I mean, he's not quite an elite strikeout rate as a starter, but it's not bad.
What do you think about Kodai Senga? I was looking at his walk rate in the second half, and it's better than when the season started. I think a lot of times when pitchers come to Major League Baseball from a foreign league, we wonder if it just takes some time to adjust to the baseball because it's different. It's not the pre-tack ball that they use in Japan. So are you buying the walk rate improvements that we've seen from Senga over the course of the second half as a skill level that he might actually possess going into 2024?
I don't know. He's pretty borderline. I'm just looking at his second half location plus, and that's a pretty good proxy for, command, in my opinion. And it's 96, and 96 is fairly borderline. I mean, it might be weird to say it, but like 97, 98 is much more like, oh, that's Shohei Ohtani, or like, even Blake Snell. I think they're in that 97 to 98 territory. 96 is where you start usually finding more relievers. So I'm not sure about the command. I will say that I don't think the Stuff Plus fully encapsulates Kodai Senga's greatness, because the forkball is not rated super highly, but it is a really good pitch. So I'm not going to go full model on this one. I'm just going to say that I think we're going to see walk rates that start with a 4 most years from this guy.
Follow-up question then is, are we going to see K rates most years that start with a 10, or at least start with a 1? There's like 11, 12 Ks per 9 actually in range with his stuff and his pitch mix.
29% strikeout rate, a four-seam fastball with good shape, a cutter that's pretty good, and then a forkball that plays past its movement metrics. Yeah, I believe in that. I also think that the forkball is a little hard. It's not a curveball that he can just land in the zone. It's not a pitch that I think he has great command over. And I think that's just going to be the fuel for these higher walk rates. And these higher walk rates are totally tenable, I think, for a starting pitcher. But I do think that maybe some years he has more like a 3.7 or a 4.1 ERA, depending on how many of those walks score. For example, right now he has a 77% strand rate. League average is anywhere from 70 to 72. Some people project that more stickily. Zips has him with a 71% strand rate going forward, and Steamer has him with a 75% strand rate going forward. That's meaningful. That'll mean something for your whip, for your ERA. And I think there'll be some years where that number kind of oscillates a little bit and more of those walks score.
So my eyes were quickly scanning through the meatball draft that we discussed last week, those first 7 rounds. Did Kodai Senga go in the first 7 rounds of the meatball draft? You might be wondering. He did not.
I would say no.
He did not. And that's a group, remember, that included Joe Ryan in the 6th, got in there. We didn't really talk about some of the later picks. Eflin was the very last pick to our friend Ryan Bloomfield at pick 105. Joe Musgrove was in there. Bobby Miller was in there. Walker Buehler was in there. Hasn't even made it all the way back from Tommy John. He was inside the top 7 rounds. Justin Steele, as I mentioned before. That later group, I mean, I think you could argue Kodai Senga against probably anybody for next year out of that group.
Yeah, I think I'd have him over Steele. Who else did you mention?
Joe Ryan was the earliest of that bunch.
Yeah.
I don't know if you start looking at Logan Webb and Fromber, I don't know if you're pushing Senga quite that high, but that's not out of bounds either. So
Webb and Fromber just have so much floor. They're just so solid.
Yeah. The host, Rob DiPietro, had Grayson Rodriguez in the 5th, kind of a later 5th round pick. So Grayson versus Senga?
Senga, unless I'm putting a little bit of a TBD on that, just because Grayson's in the midst of a bit of a transformation. So I would love to see what this this next few starts even would mean a lot for Grayson. But right now, I'd take Kodai.
The highest name in this draft that I think is still up for grabs for a toss-up would be Pablo Lopez. Pablo Lopez versus Kodai Senga would be one I would stare at for a long time.
Yeah. I'm calling up Pablo Lopez's page without looking. I would have taken Pablo Lopez.
Are you trusting?
I'm taking Pablo Lopez.
Are you trusting that Pablo Lopez holds the K percentage gains. We've seen a level
And the
close
velo
to this
gains.
before.
It's the
Right.
hardest he's ever thrown.
Right. He's up to 29.3% with the K rate. It's almost 5 percentage points over the career mark, but just about 2 percentage points over what he did in 2021.
I think he has better natural command than Kodai.
All right. So you're Pablo Lopez over Kodai Senga. I think.
Yeah, I am.
I think I'm tempted.
Especially now that we're going to get maybe 2 straight years of 180 innings pitched from Pablo Lopez too.
Yeah, it's a fun debate though, because I think you could realistically see Senga even one notch higher in K rate than he is right now, and it wouldn't faze me at all.
And you could see Pablo Lopez losing a little bit of K rate because he's had lower ones in the past.
Yep. So interesting stuff there. How about this name for some of the people are relying on? Brandon Williamson. He has a lower walk rate with the Reds than he had at AA and AAA. What's going on there? I know we had a mailbag question about the automated balls and strike system at AAA. That was a Royce Lewis question we'll probably get to in a little bit. But do you think we're overlooking that in a few facets, most notably what it's done to some control numbers for pitchers in the upper levels? Because it's not just the AAA automated balls and strikes. It's stuff like the tacked balls they were using at AA earlier this season.
All over the place.
Wreaking all sorts of havoc, increasing spin rates and helping some guys with their K rates, causing some control issues for others. What else could there be to explain Brandon Williamson's walk rate coming down this much against top-level competition?
The other thing that I would point out is that, like Hunter Brown mentioned that when he got to the major leagues, working with Martin Maldonado, who not only is a plus framer, but, and works with the major league coaching staff in terms of trying to win tonight's game. Where can we put pitches when we need to put them somewhere? Coaching and framing will be better in the major leagues for you than it was in the minor leagues for almost everybody. So that part, maybe you could almost say universally, pitchers should have slightly lower walk rates due to those two effects. The other effects, of course, are these hitters are better, so now you're going to nibble more, right? Mm. That's why it would normally go up. Normally walk rate would go in the other direction. So there are these kind of competing forces in every direction. I would say that this year, in particular, AAA walk rates are a little tough to read and take as gospel because of what you're saying. It's not only that, it's ABS, but it's like ABS Monday through Friday, and then you switch to non-ABS, the challenge system, where you challenge at the beginning, and then you switch to the ABS. And so I think it's got to be pretty hard. Kyle Harrison just came up. He had a 103 location plus, despite terrible command grades. And I don't think that he struggled against the Phillies. Kyle Harrison's the Giants hurler. I don't think he struggled against the Phillies due to command necessarily. I think it was a good lineup, and he pitched decently. 103 location plus. Brandon Williamson in the second half is a similar 103, 104. Kyle Harrison said ABS made me be in the zone more and improve my command. So, I don't know. There's something there maybe. I don't know that I want to turn this into like a, if you see X, then do Y. There's, I don't know that this is like everybody with a 12% walk rate in AAA this year could have a 9% in the big leagues. I don't know if I want to go that far, but and then the last thing on Brandon Williamson in particular is that he didn't throw the cutter all season at AAA last year, and not even this year. I think he sort of, when I was questioning why they would even bring him up, someone pointed out that he just started throwing the cutter 2 or 3 starts before they called him up. So, the cutter has made him a different pitcher, and it is for Brandon Williamson, the cutter is, his primary pitch now. And it's the pitch that he commands the best out of all his pitches. So, that's part of the picture too for Brandon Williamson.
Yeah, I think what's really kind of messed up though about the issues that are popping up in the upper levels of the minor leagues is that will still get baked into projections. Those results will still get baked into projections because of MLEs and looking back at what you have. So I think you're going to have this lag with a guy like Williamson, anybody else who's been promoted and has only been in the big leagues for a partial season, where projected performance the rest of the way is pretty far away from the current level. The bat has Brandon Williamson at a 5.53 ERA and a 1.48 whip the rest of the way. He's been at a 4.18 and a 1.25 so far, which is why for like deeper leagues, he's been more in than out of your lineups. And that's not something we expected when he got called up because of these skills flaws. So I wonder how long it's going to take to fully adjust or find a way to work through and get projections that kind of more properly reflect the goofiness of the upper levels of the minor leagues right now. It seems like that's a very tall order.
Yeah, my comp for Williamson is Wade Miley.
Okay. That's, it's not exciting, but it's still it's a competent big league starter. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the reason I say this is because it's a cutter for first thing for the most part as the establishment pitch. A four seam that's often hit or used for whiffs and a really good change that right now has a 500 slugging against. It's a really tough park. Wade Miley pitched in some really tough parks.
Yep.
So, I think that's where I think Brandon Williamson will be. He's had a slower ERA away from home. I would expect that to continue. He'd be somebody that I would use maybe 60 to 70% of the time away from home and like 20 to 30% of the time at home. Even in deeper leagues, I think.
Yeah, I think that's probably the appropriate usage for Williams. So that's an interesting comp, though, on Miley. I mean, we're talking about a guy that's spent more than a decade in the big leagues. He's had prolonged runs of success. He's had prolonged runs of struggles. It's been plenty of ups and downs, but that he's still in the big leagues at 36 and pitching for contending teams says a lot about how teams evaluate him at this stage of his career. One closer I want to throw at you, Adbert Alzolay. I have not thought about taking Adbert Alzolay out of my lineup in about 2 months because he has been phenomenal really since the Cubs just gave him the closer role. He leads Major League Baseball in saves going back to July 1st. Is he an elite closer going into next season? We just unfortunately maybe lost one over the weekend with Felix Bautista's injury, but Alzolay is pitching like someone we would really want as possibly a closer one over the last few months now. And as long as the Cubs aren't going to mess around with that role, I kind of like him as a top 10 closer.
Yeah, he seems to have the temperament for it too. A nice, excited young man that likes to come in these tough moments and throw hard. I will say that 95.5 for a closer these days is is getting close to average.
It's so stupid.
Ridiculous. I can't just say out loud.
95 fans, Velos is kind of average.
Yeah, right.
It's not really that impressive.
Well, I mean, also like a 27% strikeout rate. Like if you want to talk elite relievers, like what Felix Bautista's strikeout rate is, right?
Oh, it's 40, 48%.
46.
Yeah.
He's striking out half the people he sees, basically. And Adbert's down at 27, which is still good, but a little bit lesser than some of the other closers out there. So I don't know. I 5 is my magic number, and in terms of the circle of trust, and I'm not sure if he ascends all the way to 5 next year, but with Felix out of the mix, it might be easier to do. Do we want to do it?
Do we dare try this?
Do we dare try this? I mean, where do we put Edwin Diaz?
Diaz, I think sight unseen goes right back in because it wasn't his shoulder.
Yeah, I kind of think
his elbow.
So, yeah.
He's just right back there. That's where I'm at with him. No hesitation.
So, and we got Felix out.
That sucks. That's just brutal.
using the auction calculator, we've got, this is an interesting one. I bet you wouldn't guess who the number one reliever is according to auction calculator.
Devin Williams?
John Duran.
Is it?
Yeah.
We got to check that math again. 23 saves, 2 wins. I was looking for a big number in the wins column. I thought maybe he vultured 6 or 7 wins or something, and that would make
really
him pop.
Nice ERA.
71 Ks and 52 and a third. I don't understand. I think I disagree with the calculator. I don't really like disagreeing with calculators, but here we are.
Well, I've got, is this rest of season?
I bet you got rest of season going there.
It's rest of season. Yep.
Yeah, because like Jordan Romano has more saves, the same ratios, only a few fewer Ks. I would imagine Jordan Romano is just as valuable.
To this season, Felix Bautista, number 1, Devin Williams, number 2, Alexis Diaz, number 3, Hader, number 4, Camilo Doval, number 5. Then you got Kimbrel, Phillips, Bednar, Romano. So next year, let's just replace Bautista with Edwin Diaz.
Yep.
Yeah, I guess Devin Williams is in there. I just get a little whiff of injury risk from him that makes me nervous. I'll leave Alexis Diaz in there. Hader, a little bit older. I'll just finish it with Hader Doval. Who are we missing out on? Romano in a year where his back doesn't hurt. I don't think Alzolay jumps in there. Clase, we're missing if he has a bounce back.
So Clase is down a little bit, but I could see. I kind of feel like there's 2 tiers within that group that you mentioned, and if you put Alzolay in either of those groups, it has to be the second one right now because of the strikeout rate. But that's certainly
so what
fine.
like
Closer, really closer.
Alzolay, Romano, what Diaz or.
Yeah, are you taking Jordan Romano over Emmanuel Clase if you're choosing right now, or if you were making a late season trade for a reliever and you could, make the deal for either one of them?
I mean, Ks are a category.
They are, and Clase has been filthy in terms of velo and movement, but this is who he is. Like he's now at
a big K guy.
224 and 2/3 career innings, where it's been like a strikeout per inning, 25.6%. That's what you're going to get.
They also, he made up for some of the lower rates in strikeout rates by, having large IP numbers. But I would submit to you that 70 is something that a innings pitched is something that a young closer does, and that you stop doing at some point. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does not get to 70 this year. Although rest of season projection says he'll do it again. Even if he does, wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't do it the next year. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't think that 70 is a number you want a guy throwing every year. And in fact, one of the reasons that I think Camilo Doval has been run into a little bit of a wall, and I think of Doval as sort of similar to Clase, just a little bit more strikeouts, a little bit better slider. They used him pretty heavily here in San Francisco, Doval. And he might not even get to 70 innings, and he's already had a little bit of a downturn in performance, due to, I think, fatigue. So I would take Romano over him, is a long-winded way of saying that.
So you're Romano over Clase. Are you
So we're creating
over Clase too?
We're taking there's a first tier of Diaz, Williams, Hader, both Diaz's maybe?
Probably both Diaz's. Hader's probably in there, even if you want to put him last because of the K rate, or the walk rate rather, being at an all-time high, 13.5%. He's just getting away with that right now because he's not giving up homers. It's a huge part of it. And he still misses a ton of bats.
Almost lose jobs because we've seen Aroldis Chapman, despite league-leading stuff, lose his job over walks. And it's a weird comp. They're not the same, but but that's sort of how I think of Hader, is as a late career Aroldis Chapman has been harder to prognosticate and harder to know when it'll all just fall apart. I feel the same way about Hader. So Hader's really borderline for me. I could just put him in the second group, but if I put him in the second group, I still think I'd want, a fifth one in the first group, and maybe that's Doval. I like Bednar, I like Romano. Could be one of those guys.
Yeah. It's okay. So I'm a little bit overzealous with the Alzolay right now, but
Do you think that this seems like a pretty good group? Do you think that there has to be such a hard circle of trust next year? I feel like maybe you could wait on closer a little bit, and like, what if you got the sixth best closer in the draft next year, and it was Camilo Doval? You know what I mean?
I think you could live with that. I don't think there's as much urgency for me right now as there was 2 or 3 years ago to aggressively try and even get 2 that I liked out of that top 10. I think I'm skewing even further to the wait and see. Get someone in that 7 to 10 range because the floor is good enough. There's
a little bit right more, now. I think, of an aggressive downturn after sort of like 10, 11. Like,
that's pretty typical though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the names right now. 11th best reliever this year is Joel Payamps.
Yeah, I didn't.
13th is Kevin Ginkel. Yeah.
Well,
Duran is 20th, and
I was going to say we didn't
21st. Like,
we didn't mention him. Yeah,
those guys could actually be in my circle of trust. So I may try to do 2 out of the top 10 next year as opposed to 1 in the top 5.
I see. So waiting until like round 6, 7, and 8, and maybe trying to sneak 2 in from
2
that
out of
group.
3 in those rounds, and maybe like if I left those rounds Romano Bednar, like why would I wouldn't feel bad at all.
Yeah, I wonder if you'll have a shot at one of them at least in that range, because it's all it takes is one. I mean, it
takes is one run, right?
Yeah, and I think Joan Duran's probably in the right around that hater line for a lot of people. I think you'd look at them very similar.
Circle of trust.
He's either one of the last guys in the first group, or he's the top guy in the second group. He's right in that conversation as kind of a top 6, 7, 8 closer. I think the only real question with him, same kind of thing as we've always had, is how many save opportunities does he lose based on the way the Twins want to handle their bullpen? Is that still going to be a concern going into next season? He's got a shot at 30, maybe, with a good September.
It's a little bit of just a growing concern every year with every team.
Yeah.
It's actually sort of surprising that the Giants have been so conventional at the closer role when they've done everything else to destroy convention in pitching.
I mean, that's one of the things I really like about what the Brewers have done over the years. Once they decided Hader was just a closer, and ever since Devin Williams replaced him, he's just been the guy. That's it. Yeah. Devin Williams is the closer. Devin Williams gets the saves unless the game goes extras, or unless he's not available because they've had 3 consecutive days with a save chance, or recent workloads somehow steer him away from the game plan that day. And that sort of predictability is increasingly rare, as you said. And I think that's something that jumps off the page to me as something I really like. Now, I guess the downside in Williams is that high walk rate. He is a higher walk rate guy. That's how guys reach against him. It's one of the ways they get on against Devin Williams.
Yeah, it's possible. Just we're reading this all wrong, and Edwin Diaz will have an injury a discount, and Devin Williams and Josh Hader will have walk rate discounts, and the number 1 reliever taken next year will be Alexis Diaz.
Well, meatball draft. Just one last time bringing that up.
Yeah, what was number 1?
Bautista was first.
Oh, well, that's
brutal, right?
Yeah.
Clase was the second closer before the end of round 2.
Staying power up there.
Yeah, that was our buddy James Anderson. It's just knowing he's the guy. Like in this early, that makes sense. Hader was third, and we don't know where Hader's going to pitch in 2024. He's a free agent, so he's probably going to cash in. Raisel Iglesias was up there. I don't know if I'm not as high on Iglesias. Yeah, I think he's a little lower for me. Doval and Devin Williams were also within the first 3 rounds. And then Alexis and Edwin Diaz went back-to-back early in round 4.
Nice.
Before you got to Duran and Jordan Romano. And then coming back through in the 5th. No closers in the 5th. And then all the way down to Ryan Presley.
So that means
in the back part
5th,
of the 6th.
I could have taken...
You had choices in the 5th. You could have had your choice of any one of these guys. This is the order they were drafted in. Ryan Presley, David Bednar, Kenley Jansen, Paul Sewald, Andres Munoz. Those are the only other closers that were
not bad, dude. I take Bednar and then maybe even double up on the way back.
Yeah. Oh, and Alzolay went in there too. Alzolay went at the end of the 6th, so he was part of that.
maybe a 5th round closer for me next year.
All right. See, we're always thinking about the future while we think about the present, but I love the way the Cubs have been using Adbert, Alzolay. We got some hitters that we'll save for later in the week. And if you've got other hitters you want us to talk about that are just surprisingly important to your teams the rest of the way, just tweet at us at Rates and Barrels. We're happy to fold a few more names into the rundown. I had one more pitching question to get to before we go. This one came in over the weekend, I believe. And it's basically what to do with Tyler Wells in a deeper league, because he's been shifted to the bullpen and he's still pitching at AAA. A few weeks ago, it looked like someone that might come back and be a member of that rotation down the stretch. And they were maybe managing his innings by just sending him down for a little while. But in a 15-team league at this point, is Wells someone you're still stashing away, or are you using that roster spot on somebody else?
You know, I wrote the blurb on Bautista being out and brought up the fact that DL Hall was brought up to the big leagues and could figure into the mix, and Shintaro Fujinami, both behind Cano. Tyler Wells in the minors this year or in AAA this year is not striking out a ton of hitters, has never really struck out a ton of hitters. I know he's been a closer in the past in baseball, but I don't see him filling that role when put up against the other people that are in that pen. They just have more strikeout stuff, more kind of closery stuff. And notice I included Fujinami. So
right. I think they want Wells for bulk. I think he's a bridge on their short starters. They're just trying to keep him fresh enough in the minors to have him still have something left in the tank once the playoffs get here. But it's not a very fantasy friendly role at all. It's a brutal role for fantasy purposes.
Yeah. I almost dropped him off my 20-team league just because I think he's too close to that glob. And I'm trying to, finish in the money.
Yeah. So I think in the case of this question came from Sean. Thanks for sending this question in, Sean. I think it's a cut. Try to find someone that can help you a bit more than Tyler Wells at this point. A few weeks ago, I was on board. I know Al on the pod said he was a hold. I thought the same thing. I thought it was going to be a quick turnaround. And I thought maybe we'd even see him piggybacking off of Flaherty if Flaherty was having problems getting deep into starts. And you could see, 4 innings.
Honestly, it could be. That's something to watch. I mean, he's had 2 appearances in AAA and 2 innings. So right now that's more of a bullpen role. But if the next one is 2 innings, then maybe all they were trying to do was slow him down and then bring him back up again because of innings totals. Because, his career high was 2022 was 105. He's already at 115, 123 this year. So if they wanted him at all later on, at some point they had to do something where they throttle him back and then move him forward. So there's still, I think it's still an open question about like how many innings he pitches in his next appearance in AAA.
Yeah, well, it seems like that's very much up in the air at this point. But thanks again for that question, Sean. We are going to sign off. On our way out the door, we could have a special on subscriptions right now. It's down to $1 a month for the first year. You can get that by going to theathletic.com/rates and barrels. Gets you everything that Eno writes, fantasy football coverage, everything else we've got on the site for one low price. You can find Eno on Twitter at Enosaris. You can find me at Derek Van Riper. The pod itself is at Rates and Barrels. Feel free to tweet at the pod. The pod is very happy when people tweet at it. So stroke the pod's ego if you don't mind. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Tuesday.
Thanks for listening.